And we're live, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Keelan. Welcome, everyone, for our presentation today to talk about the Texas Success Initiative and the Texas Success Initiative Assessment version 2.0. We'll be talking in great detail today, giving some more specifications and specifics about the test, and hopefully addressing a lot of the questions that we've been receiving. So thank you for joining today. The webinar today is intended for a higher education audience and stakeholders, and tomorrow's webinar during the same time will focus on our K-12 colleagues. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube's, on the Coordinating Board's YouTube page beginning Monday, November 23rd. Please save your questions for the end. When we get through our presentation, the formal part of our presentation, my colleague, Mr. Keelan Morgan, and I will be volleying back and forth and hopefully being able to address all of your questions. So my name is Suzanne Morales-Vail. I'm the Director of Developmental and Adult Education for the state of Texas, and I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Keelan Morgan, my Assistant Director. And Keelan, if you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide, and we'll see what the agenda is for today. So as we mentioned, we'll talk about various updates related to the Texas Success Initiative, and then we'll be talking specifically about testing related to the assessment and placement options that are available during COVID. And Keelan then will be talking very detailed about the Texas Success Initiative Assessment version 2.0, including timelines, enhancements, test specifications, the newly approved college readiness benchmarks, and some additional information. And then we'll end, of course, with questions. Next slide. So recently at our board meeting, our board did approve on October 22nd 3 items that are related to the TSI. First of all, the college readiness benchmarks related to the TSIA 2.0. And by the way, that board meeting is available on the Coordinating Board YouTube page. It did also provide a briefing from our colleague, Dr. Luz Bay from the college board, who is the lead psychometrician and oversaw that process leading to the college readiness benchmark recommendations that were approved. Also, scaling of corequisite models to 100% of those students who assess at diagnostic levels 5 for math and diagnostic levels 5 and 6 for ELAR. And then of course, there'll be an additional consideration for the essay score. Next slide. Equally important, at this board meeting, the board also approved TSI Rule 4.56, which actually officially replaces the TSIA with the TSIA 2.0 beginning January 11th, 2021. And we also wanted to reiterate, while the score ranges do change, you can see that there's the minor change just so that we can differentiate among the 2 tests. But the diagnostic levels at 1 to 6 do not change and remain at levels 1 to 6. So we want to just let everyone know that all of the exemptions outlined in TSIA Rule 4.62, Section 8B, those exemptions do not change and also still remain applicable for TSIA 2.0. I think one of the specific areas that most people were interested in is the exemption of students at diagnostic levels 1 to 4. They would not be subject to the requirements of House Bill 2223. Next slide. So in talking about the various testing options, these became available starting April 4th. And of course, we want to thank the hard work and the major, like I said, the major behind the scenes work that the College Board, our colleagues at the College Board had to go through in order to ensure that TSIA testing still did remain. We had a small lull, but starting April 4th, TSIA testing options were still available via remote proctoring. You may know this was not the case with some of the other major assessments, including SAT and ACT, but the TSIA we were able to get that available through remote proctoring. There is a remote proctoring service that the College Board had worked with called Examity, and they actually provided the proctors to engage in the proctoring component of the TSIA assessment administration. And we just want to let everyone know and remind everyone that the automated or the artificial intelligence options available through that testing service are not approved for TSIA testing. However, we also want to emphasize that video chat web services such as WebEx, GoToMeeting, and Zoom, those are available both for higher ed test administrators and our K-12 test administrators. And they could then use those services to have their local trained proctors actually do the test administration for the students. Next slide. Additionally, we just wanted to emphasize though, because of course our main goal is to maintain the validity and reliability of those scores. So you can see here that we did have some protocols that we did have to mandate to ensure that that reliability and validity remained consistent and comparable to, of course, our regular in-person testing. Next slide. And then, of course, we also had our COVID placement waivers. So Commissioner Keller in March did approve what we call the TSIA COVID waivers. And that allowed for all non-exempt students, either undergraduates, so those who are high school complete, who are entering post-secondary or returning to post-secondary, and also our high school students who are looking to qualify for credit coursework. That both of those students enrolling in college level coursework, both starting in summer 2020 and throughout the academic year 2020-21. So that was this fall that we're in right now, next spring, and through next summer, institutions are able to use one of three options. And of course, we also asked that they used additional indicators if they did not have TSIA scores available, or so in lieu of TSIA scores or in addition to TSIA scores, other indicators such as high school GPA and course taking patterns, and perhaps even non-cognitive factors to determine which option would be the best one. So the first one was to enroll those students whose TSI status was unknown in a corequisite model. And this was also available through the COVID waivers for, again, high school complete students or those wishing to qualify for dual credit. It should be noted, however, for dual credit or high school students, we just needed to remind everyone that the developmental education component of the corequisite model was not available, was not subject to formula funding reimbursement for institutions. Next slide. The second option, of course, is a provision that we did have in existing rules, section 4.55, that allowed for exceptional circumstances when a student had no access to TSIA testing. Although this rule was put in place not during a pandemic, it was actually intended originally for some other more unusual circumstances, perhaps dealing sometimes with our international students who sometimes came in the last minute. But after reading through this, we found it could also be applicable for those students who had no access to TSIA testing. They could be enrolled directly in the college level coursework without the assessment, but they still had to be assessed by the end of that first semester or that time period where they were enrolled in the freshman level coursework. Now, we did talk with many institutions that had some questions about this, and some additional guidance we gave with regard to this rule is if it was clear that the student had every likelihood of passing that college level course, then we said it was not mandatory that the student needed to be tested on the TSIA. And then that testing by the end of the semester should really be reserved for those students who were struggling or who were pretty likely not to successfully complete that college level course. Next slide. And then that third option would be for those students who are non-degree or non-certificate students. These could actually be for some of our high school students, and those students who are determined to be non-degree, non-certificate seeking. Those students could, again, be enrolled directly in college level coursework. We just wanted to remind everyone, though, that this probably would not be a viable option for many of our high school complete students, since those students were likely to be using their federal financial aid, their Pell Grant, student loans, and so forth. And in order to use the federal financial aid, students have to be classified as degree or certificate seeking. And just one final note, however, whatever option that your institution chose, or set of options, we reminded everyone that they still need to ensure that their practices are consistent with SAC-COC standards and policy. Next slide. So when we consider all of these three options, the one thing I think we can all agree on is it certainly would not be a good option for an institution to choose one option for all of their students, sort of that one size fits all approach. So in other words, which students would be good candidates who probably would do well in a co-requisite option, and which students actually would do well with direct placement without support in that college level course. And here are some examples of these additional indicators or multiple measures that we encouraged institutions to consider, starting with student intent and then going through high school GPA, course taking patterns, including successful completion of Algebra 2 or higher math. There's evidence of the student also participating in advanced academics. Of course, those all important non-cognitive factors are also very important. And we encouraged institutions for those students who may have been coming from an adult education or an AEL program or another program where they did have a GED or HiSET score, also to go ahead and consider those scores based on the vendor college readiness benchmarks, and go ahead and place students directly in college level courses as applicable using those scores as well. Next slide. The important thing is, as we go through this COVID waiver, and this is something that's definitely very important to Commissioner Keller, and that is we do track which option or options or which measures were used in order to determine the appropriate placement for the student. So our colleagues in our data division provided a webinar that gave a guidance specifically for reporting officers and reporting officials at your institution. And of course, we can let you know where I believe that webinar is also available on Coordinating Board's YouTube page. And then, of course, we also have our annual depth survey. And in this year's survey, as I'm sure you all experience, those of you who regularly deal with our depth survey, we had a whole section on the COVID waivers and the additional multiple measures that your institution selected to choose for this time period. And of course, we will be using that data to provide additional insights for possible future statewide TSIA policy considerations. Next slide. And then, of course, a question that we very, very often receive, and we need to just let everyone know that the TSIA COVID waivers, also known as using those multiple measures, are definitely in effect through placements of summer 2021, and possible extension is currently under consideration by agency leadership. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague, Mr. Keelan Morgan, and he will unpack the TSIA 2.0.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morales-Vale. Unpack, oh, what a word, but let's get started. And real quick, if you've been sending me questions through the group chat, since I'm now going to be focused on presenting, I might not be able to respond in real time, but once I transition the program back over to my colleague, I'll definitely address all of your questions that you put in the chat. Jumping right in with the Texas Success Initiative version 2.0, here's a list of commonly used abbreviations. One thing that I know about us working in higher ed, we use a lot of native language. And once I transitioned to the Higher Education Coordinating Board, it's just the same. So there's a lot of abbreviations that we use throughout the context of our presentations. And here's a little cheat sheet for you. Whereas I always like to think that it's really easy to understand, sometimes some of the lingo that we use is not. So there's a cheat sheet for you there.
Keelan, could I just, you might want to try to get a little bit closer to the microphone. I'm seeing some comments. Thank you.
Did that fix it? Is it better? All right. So here's the TSI2 timeline, the development timeline. As you see here, there are a number of key dates, and I'll highlight a few of them for you. The process started well before August 2019. However, in August 2019, that's when the College Board was selected as the test vendor. Fast forwarding a little bit, we have had some major processes happen. I'll highlight our assessment task force review. Our first meeting was in November of 2019, and it meets quarterly. And those meetings are normally 2 days. However, in our virtual setting, we've condensed them to one, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about what's accomplished there shortly. We've had item review, and that was a 4-day process. Our standard setting process, a 2-day process. And then on October 22nd, Dr. Morales-Vale mentioned it earlier, but on October 22nd, the board actually approved the new college readiness benchmarks for the TSIA2, which I'll talk about in detail shortly. On October 1st through 15th, we had beta testing for higher ed faculty. And last but not least, that bold date in red, January 11th, 2021 is launch date. And I'm going the opposite direction. All right, so I want to highlight a couple of processes. Our assessment task force, those quarterly meetings. So we've assembled a panel of national assessment, content, and psychometric experts to provide advice and guidance related to all facets of the TSIA2. And you'll see the list of items that they provide us feedback on. And this actually is an abbreviated list of what they provide feedback on. But it's the checks and balance to any decision that we as an agency, in response to input from our stakeholders or the College Board, any changes that are recommended to the TSIA2, this is the checks and balance. So we have a, I use it loosely, but nonpartisan group, a group that's not invested on behalf of the agency or the test vendor to provide us very neutral and expert feedback on how any decision that's made regarding the TSIA2 impacts the test and, most importantly, the students in which it will serve. The item review process. This was a 4-day process, and we were actually fortunate enough, this was right before COVID locked us down in February. We were together for 4 days where faculty content experts from across the state in both mathematics and English language arts and reading, where they performed quality control on proposed test items in consideration of item properties, including but not limited to the difficulty of the item, discrimination, bias, and the alignment to the revised standards. And one of the also very important processes that took place as part of the development timeline was the standard setting process. And again, with all of these processes, it was a diverse panel of experts, whereas the assessment task force is a national panel. The item review and standard setting are very specific to Texas. We have faculty content experts, again, representing both math and English language arts and reading from a wide variety of domains. And with respect to a diverse demographic, and we were very intentional about that in terms of representation from K-12, higher ed, and then higher ed, both 2-year and 4-year institutions, as well as experts with adult education as well. And note, With the standard setting process, we used industry standard bookmarking method to help establish the college readiness benchmarks. So throughout this process, your colleagues from across the state did a phenomenal job that was led by our test vendor, the College Board, in going through these items and paying close attention and doing everything that they needed to do to help set those college readiness benchmarks. So I highlight those processes just to let you know that the benchmarks that you see that were published in the Texas Register and approved by the Higher Education Coordinating Board, they were not pulled out of a hat or developed by us per se. They were definitely set by faculty content experts that do this work every day, boots on the ground, with the students that sit in the spaces that you sit. And last but not least, a number of all of these processes that I've just highlighted for you included both pre and post meeting work. So whereas I've indicated that traditionally the assessment task force meetings are 1 to 2 days, pending in-person versus virtual, the item review 4 days, and the standard setting 2 days, each of these significant processes actually require the panelists to engage in work outside of the space that they're physically meeting. And the enhancements to the TSIA2. So we've realigned to the revised standards, the most recent Texas College and Career Readiness Standards, the revised TEKS for Algebra 2 and English 3, the Adult Education Literacy 2.0 standards, and the National Reporting Systems Educational Functional Level Descriptors. We've integrated reading and writing, yay, on the test. So now, in terms of placement, the integration of reading and writing on a new section on the TSIA2 called English Language Arts and Reading. And the goal there was to make placement a lot easier with the separate reading and writing sections, and then requiring integrated reading and writing in developmental education. It just always, we fielded a lot of questions from institutions regarding placement. So now, furthermore, being in line with what's happening in K-12 with the SAT, we're really excited about this change as well. We've reduced the diagnostic test to 1. So there's no longer, take for instance, in math, they had, for both sections actually, for all 3 sections, there was an adult basic education diagnostic, and then there was a developmental education diagnostic, and the student would be routed to the respective diagnostic pending their score on the placement tests, or those first set of 20 questions on the current exam. However, on the TSIA2, any student that does not meet the college readiness benchmark will be routed to a diagnostic test for that subject area, and everyone will receive a diagnostic level score of 1 through 6. And transposing that to the current version, only those that test into the adult basic education diagnostic actually receive a diagnostic level score. So again, one more way for us to streamline the test in terms of using the scores for placement. And we're really excited about this next piece that's in here on the reduced diagnostic test to 1. We've normed the diagnostic test on the same ability scale as the college readiness classification test. What does that mean? You have to wait. So that's the cliffhanger. I'll explain a little bit more regarding that when I get to helping you better understand the score profile for the TSIA2. But essentially, I'm not going to make you wait. Essentially, what it means is that they're on the same scale. So the diagnostic test can be used with more confidence independently of the CRC score. Whereas now, everybody attaches, let's just say, for instance, in math, if the student scores 335 or below, they go into that adult basic education diagnostic. That's paired with the diagnostic score. In the TSIA2, we're much more confident that the diagnostic test results can be used, that level 1 through 6 for placement, independently of the college readiness classification score, that 910 to 950 that I'll talk about in a few. The second chance college readiness opportunity for math. So currently, on the writing section, we have that second chance pass opportunity in conjunction with their diagnostic level score, their CRC score, ABE level score, and the essay score, where the student, if they don't meet that initial indicator of college readiness, there's a second opportunity for the student to pass. However, now that's been infused in the ELAR section, the integrated reading and writing section, as well as that exists in the math section now. So if a student does not meet the college readiness benchmark on the CRC in math and is routed into the diagnostic, if they score a diagnostic level score of 6, the student would then be classified as college ready. So we're really excited about that. And just so you'll know, we're really going to be watching the data. We'll really be watching the data on those metrics as well, particularly given that this is a new route to college readiness for students with the TSIA2.
And Keelan, if I could just add real quick, when you refer to the CRC, the College Readiness Classification Test, that's basically just the first 20 questions of the test.
Exactly.
And if students meet the benchmark at that point, they're done with testing and they're considered college ready. If they don't meet the benchmark, then they move into diagnostic.
Thank you, Suzanne. The transportability of test results for students. So now with the functionality of the platform, the students will have access to send their scores at the time of testing. So once a student sits down and takes the TSIA2, they can send their scores up to 3 institutions. And in the next bullet, the student portal, let's just say I didn't send it to all of the schools that I wanted to. The student can go into their student portal now and access their scores, and again, send them to a number of institutions, unlimited number of institutions at no cost to the student. And I really want to highlight that. And one thing with the student portal we're really excited about, it's also going to give the student access to tutorials related to the features of the TSIA2, particularly the calculator and highlighter features. So if you understand, if you're familiar with the current version of the TSI, you'll know, or the TSIA, you'll know that the first time that a student gets to test the on-screen calculators that are associated with the exam is when they're starting the math section. However, we really wanted to parse that out and now give students an opportunity to interact with those on-screen calculators to develop that comfort level in an effort to perhaps reduce text anxiety. And then one thing, handheld calculators of any kind or physical calculators of any kind are not permitted for use with the TSIA or the TSIA2. So again, we wanted to give the student one more tool that can be used in their success on the assessment, as well as the highlighter feature. The highlighter feature is available to the student in both the ELAR and the mathematics section. So in the ELAR section, if there's a passage of text and the student would like to highlight a point to remember or something in their answer choices, they would be able to do that there. And as well as in the math section, if there's a problem that comes up that happens to be a word problem, as we traditionally coin them, the students will be able to use the highlighter feature there, as well as with their answer choices as well. Improved data matching. We will be standardizing the use of ID fields. So if you have access to the platform, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But to give a little bit more depth to this, all of the scores for the TSIA do not exist in one database. If it's a K-12 administration, it exists in one database. If it's a higher ed administration, it exists in another. However, through cross-institutional reporting, anyone who offers the TSIA has access to all of the scores through cross-institutional reporting. But now, when we come to the statewide level, the standardization of ID fields will help us better work with our colleagues at the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, to match data, particularly for those students. Let's just say if you have not indicated college readiness when you graduate from high school and you now enroll in higher ed and you take the TSIA and pass it. Now, when we work to standardize the use of the ID fields, we had the test vendor add a supplemental ID field to the platform to where we can capture another ID field. So in conjunction with their TSDS or their, I don't even want to mess up the whole name, but there's a 10-digit ID number that K-12 has access to that they'll be using as their primary ID field, and higher ed will be using it as a supplemental ID field in some cases, and more guidance about that will be coming out. But just know we're working to improve data matching across our pipeline between secondary and higher ed. Access the TSIA2 learning resources. We're really excited about this. TSIA2 learning resources is an online library of instructional and practice materials directly related to the areas of TSIA2. And did I mention it is free? So many times we get questions from the field asking what materials are there available for students to prepare for the TSIA2 or the TSIA currently. And this is the solution. So this particular tool will be available to both students and educators. And you'll note there that I have that training to be announced. We're working with the developer of this product to nail down some dates to do some trainings in the very near future, and we'll keep you abreast of those dates as they come available. And it's recommended for use with the high school college prep course, or if for on the higher ed side, the college readiness classes or workshops. And one thing that I want to highlight in terms of the instructional and practice materials, these are all open educational resources. So you'll see a lot of instructional videos from Khan Academy, I'd like to highlight, and some other resources. Students can go in and pull practice worksheets, interactive quizzes. And for educators, you can go in and create an account. Now, while the student can't actually create an account, educators can. And once the educator creates an account, they can actually put together assignments and distribute them to students via the platform. Now, before you get too excited, it's not a learning management system, so you can't grade through the system. So if you put, let's just say, an instructional video and 2 worksheets and you email that out to the students for completion, the student would need to print out that worksheet, complete it, and then manually turn it in to you or through whatever modality you lay out, but the grading couldn't happen within the context of that system. You also have the ability to, as an educator, to upload your own resources. So this is a pretty unique feature because let's just say if I develop a really great quiz for my students at my institution and I want to share it with a colleague at another institution, I can upload it and I can send it out that way as well. And with the TSIA2 learning resources, we will be reaching out to faculty in the near future that participated in the beta testing experience to further learn how we can utilize this resource for the field. Whereas I kind of gave you some uses of it just now, we will be working with the faculty group in the near future for both ELAR and mathematics to better determine future use of the tool as well. And you'll notice at the end of that, it says custom materials available with a learning locator code for the TSIA2 learning resources. So with the learning locator code for any student that completes a diagnostic test, so you did not meet the college readiness benchmark on the CRC, you were routed to the diagnostic test, and you may have just still come up short of meeting that college readiness benchmark. In your diagnostic profile, you'll receive a learning locator code. The learning locator code, when the student clicks on it, it'll take them into the TSIA2 learning resources and provide them with a customized set of materials that the student can potentially take from and engage in to help close those skill gaps that have been specifically identified based on their performance on the diagnostic test. So again, We're really, really excited about this tool, and we'll definitely be reaching out to faculty to further assist us in its implementation and utility to all of our stakeholders. The TSIA2 accommodations, we just always like to reiterate that there are a number of accommodations built into the platform. First, the test is untimed. There's a save and continue later feature. However, it's not available for the essay, but for the multiple choice portions or the CRCs, it is available. And if the student engages that function, the student has up to 13 days to come back and finish the TSIA. I shared with you the calculators. So they'll have access to them in the tutorials through the student portal. However, as an accommodation, since handheld calculators or physical calculators are not permitted for use with the assessment, the pop-up screen calculators for in the math section, whether it be the 4-function, square root, or TI-84 graphing calculator, are available for student use as applicable with each math question for the math section. And again, we have the highlighter feature available for both the ELAR and math tests. The next point, so if you our higher ed stakeholders, if you get a K-12 entity that reaches out to you that's saying, I'm trying to determine appropriate accommodations, that is definitely at our request. So you would refer them to the Office of Disability Services. And one of the things is, since this is a test of college readiness, all of the accommodations that a student may be provided, all of the accommodations that a student may be provided in K-12 aren't necessarily the accommodations that a student will be provided in higher ed. So we lean on our higher ed providers to work with our K-12 test administrators to determine the appropriate accommodations. And again, we will be releasing some formal documentation to provide guidance to our K-12 and higher ed partners that administer the tests regarding accommodations in the near future as well with the launch of the tests. The accommodated versions are the same as what's offered with the TSIA, with the current version of the TSIA. We have the standard or large print test booklets. We have the Braille version, and then the companion right placer, the essay. That's not meant that, okay, we can do this as an independent piece. It's part of the companion versions. So it's an all or nothing. So if a student is taking the companion version, they'll get the companion right placer. If they're taking the computer adaptive version of the test, they'll get the computer version of the essay. And note, the use of the companion versions of the TSIA2 are recommended as a last resort. These versions do not offer the features of the computer adaptive version and require more test questions to assess student ability. And whereas we always, we want to make sure that the test is administered in the most effective way. If you have specific questions about whether or not to administer the companion version to a student, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or Dr. Morales-Vale, and we'll be more than happy to provide you with guidance. As a note, the TSIA2, both scores for the TSIA2 and TSIA are valid for 5 years from date of testing. And I saw that question actually pop up in the chat. The THECB will continue to support a statewide pre-assessment activity that's currently provided through Quirium. But just a heads up, we're at the end of that contract and we will be rebidding that contract. So if Quirium is successful, it will be Quirium. Otherwise, it'll be another selected vendor, but we will continue to support a statewide pre-assessment. Here's a little bit on the unit cost for the TSIA2. Each unit is priced at $1.75. And note that the costs that you see here are reflective of what the institution will pay to the test vendor to purchase units. It's not the fee a student may be charged by the institution. From the current version to the TSIA2, the overall cost to offer the entire suite of tests was reduced by $3.01. And one thing that we ask with setting of administrative fees, that you be cognizant of the financial impact to students when setting these fees. We have institutions that charge some upwards of $20 per section to offer the TSIA2. And we work very hard to deliver the test to the state at a very effective cost. However, we don't have control over what you charge, but we do strongly encourage you to consider the financial impact to students when setting your administrative fees related to the delivery or the administering the TSIA2 to your students. And a common question we also receive, yes, if you have current units on hand, those units will carry over and can be used for the TSIA2. And real quick, I'm gonna stop here and field a couple of questions before I get into some of the more technical pieces of the TSIA2. And Suzanne, be ready. I might volley a few of these to you as well. There's a question real quick on, could there be a soft launch of the TSIA2 perhaps on January 4th? Unfortunately not. The way the platform is designed, it's literally going to switch off and the new test is going to come online. If you have specific questions about the web service function or some of the technical details with the transition, feel free to reach out to the College Board's help desk, and they're more than prepared to provide you with guidance. But the actual live version will not be available until January the 11th.
Keelan, if I can also add, we've had some questions and concerns about that particular launch date. With our experience in launching the current version of the TSIA, there is never a good launch date for a test like this, especially when the old version goes away and a new one to be replaced by the new one. However, we did have to go through some delays because of COVID-related restrictions. We were, and the College Board went above and beyond what their contract required, but we did have those contractual limitations that made this the date the last one that we can consider, and then also, of course, addressing the College Board's capacity and so forth. So, but we do want to emphasize with the COVID waivers in place, we think that will mitigate some of the challenges that often come with the launch of a new test. So hopefully you'll be able to, consider those COVID waivers, as the whole state, as you as an institution, and as the state switches to the new TSIA.
And then with respect, Suzanne, I was multitasking, and you may have addressed it, but the reason for starting the test on January 11th, it's mainly due to we've already postponed the the implementation of the test twice. And with the contract that we have currently in place with the vendor, we had limited dates that we could work with, and this was the one that we had to go with, unfortunately.
Yeah, and remember that this test is also used by our K-12 partners, and so they also have a different start dates as well. So yeah, and unfortunately this was the date that was available. And again, just to emphasize, with those COVID waivers in place, hopefully that will mitigate some of the challenges.
All right, now save the rest of the questions. They'll be better suited toward the end of the presentation. And here's an overview of the required training for TSIA2. So if you are a TSIA platform administrator, institutional administrator for the TSIA platform at your institution, you're required to attend these 4 trainings. We have 3 currently going. We actually have training going on right now. And we'll have 1 more week of training in early, 2 more weeks of training, one starting in early December and then one in January for you to do that. It's really important if you are a TSIA institutional administrator that you go through these trainings. If your institution, or if you do not go through if you do not go through these trainings, you risk your account being suspended until you do. So in order to reduce the likelihood or reduce your students being impacted by a suspended account, please make sure that if you're part of who I'm speaking to, if you're an institutional administrator and you're required to go through these trainings, that you do so.
Keelan, I just want to share at last count, I believe it was 98% of higher ed test administrators and their teams have gone through this training. So great job.
All right, so here's my disclaimer. I'm about to jump into some of the more technical aspects of the TSIA2. While we do not anticipate any major changes to what I'm going to share with you until the tests actually launch, everything is still in draft format. So if by chance something that's presented in this particular section differs slightly from documentation that you're provided with once the tests launch, again, we're in the final stages, but we do want to be very transparent about the TSIA2, the development process, and make this information available to you. So, like the TSIA2 is computer adaptive. The pre-assessment activity will still be required before the students take the TSIA2. The test session begins with the college readiness classification test. And as a note there, just so you'll know, when the student starts the college readiness classification test, everybody starts with a medium difficulty question. So everybody starts off at the same starting point. The diagnostic test is required if the college readiness benchmark is not met on the college readiness classification test and or essay in some cases. And in most cases, the students will receive their individual score report immediately after testing. So that's a high-level overview of the student experience. So for those that participated in beta testing, I received a number of questions. My CRC score was high, and I was still routed to the diagnostic test. That was intentionally to provide you with an experience for both tests. But in the student experience, they will only see the diagnostic test if the college readiness benchmark is not met on the CRC. Suzanne?
Yes, I just wanted to add, let's see, we were talking about the college. Okay, I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought and I'm sure it'll come back to me and I'll have to interrupt you at that point.
Hey, not a problem at all. Jumping right in. So here's what we call the design. So the mathematics, the college readiness classification test, those first 20 items. So that essentially determines college readiness, yes or no. So the CRC, 20 items for math. The diagnostic test contains 48 items. For the English language arts and reading, the college readiness classification test contains 30 items, and the diagnostic test contains 48 items. And in the ELAR suite is where the essay still lives, and it's still a persuasive essay, 350 to 600 words, and in most cases, it's scored by the automated system.
Okay, Keelan, my thought came back to me, and I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what you said in the previous slide about everyone starting at a medium level of difficulty. But remember, with this being a computer adaptive test and drawing from an item pool of over 1,000 items, if you hypothetically have a classroom of 100 kids, they will all start at a medium level of difficulty. But the likelihood that any more than 2 or 3 students would actually see the exact same test question is very, very slim.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's a great clarification. And delving a little deeper into math. So now you'll see the math test strands. There are 4 test strands for each test. For math, there are quantitative reasoning, algebraic reasoning, geometric and spatial reasoning, and probabilistic and statistical reasoning. So with quantitative reasoning and algebraic reasoning, you'll see, for all of them, you'll see the number of items associated with the CRC and the diagnostic. So for quantitative reasoning, it's 6 items for the CRC. Algebraic reasoning is 7 items, geometric and spatial reasoning, 3 items, probabilistic and statistical reasoning, 4 items. And with the CRC, one of the criticisms on the current version is heavily algebraically focused. So one thing that we really sought to do with this, with the TSIA2, is to really make sure that we spread out the items across the content areas. And you'll see with the diagnostic test that 48 items is split right down the middle among the 4, or in quarters among the 4, with 12 items for each section. Did you have anything to add to that, Suzanne? She'll jump in if she does. All right, so breaking down the math section a little further, I'm not going to read these to you verbatim, but you will receive a copy of this presentation, and they'll be here for your review, as well as they're listed in even more detail in the test specification documents that are available as well. So you'll see here the quantitative reasoning, algebraic reasoning. These are what we call the sub-content categories. So we have the test strands, the sub-content categories, and the content categories that you see on each of the slides, this one and those to follow, are those representative of the items that are in the that are on the college readiness classification test and the diagnostic. However, when it comes to the diagnostic actually includes a broader range of test items to include content related to the Adult Education Literacy Standards 2.0, as well as the National Reporting Systems Educational Functional Level descriptors. So I highlight that because when we're looking at this content and we talk about, I shared earlier how the diagnostic test is normed to the CRC, to the same ability scale, the content is across both tests. However, there is some content that's only in the diagnostic test. And for geometric and spatial reasoning and probabilistic and statistical reasoning, you'll see the sub-content categories there. And for ELAR, the test strands, it's broken down the middle, reading focused and writing focused. The reading focused test strands are literary text analysis and informational text analysis and synthesis. And for the CRC, it's 15 items, and diagnostic is 24. And writing focus is essay revision and editing, sentence revision, editing, and completion. And again, the CRC has 15 items and the diagnostic has 24 as well. And breaking those down a little bit further, you'll see the reading focused test strands and sub-content areas. I'll give you a few seconds to review those. And for the writing focused test strands and sub-content areas for your review. And to the right placer, these are the rubric that's used to grade the essays that are submitted through the automated system. And there's no change in the right placer from the current version to the TSIA2. And here's the real fun part, understanding the scores. And this is probably about, I would probably say right now in our higher ed sense, about 60% of the emails that Dr. Morales-Vale and I respond to working with our higher ed partners. So you'll see that there's only two subject areas, mathematics and English language arts and reading. And for the CRC, the range is 910 to 990. And again, on the CRC, it's just really college ready, yes or no. If you're not college ready, you're then routed into the diagnostic, and the diagnostic test range is level 1 through 6. So what we're already familiar with. And the essay test range is still 1 through 8. So here's some things that we really want you to hone in on regarding the diagnostic specifically. The diagnostic test provides feedback on specific areas of strength and weakness. The diagnostic test should be used when placing students into developmental education coursework for high school complete students or considerations for college prep courses for high school students. The TSIA2 diagnostic tests are normed on the same ability scale as the CRC. And I have that twice in the presentation intentionally because we want you to start to understand that with this particular change and it being normed on the same ability scale, that once a student does not meet that college readiness benchmark and you start to own in on your placement decisions, your placement decision can literally be based on that level 1 through 6 score. And with the ELAR section, of course, we do understand that you'll bring the essay into that. However, you don't have to triangulate the diagnostic score back to what they did on the CRC. In the past, we've had situations where, let's just say a student did scored very low on the CRC. So they might make on the current version a 330 on the objective section or the CRC, and then on the diagnostic, turn around and have game busters and score a level 5. And that creates a lot of uncertainty. It's like, well, why did they do so poorly on the CRC and then they did very well on the diagnostic? With the current version, with the TSIA2, we do not anticipate that because the item pool for the diagnostic test is normed along the same ability scale as the item pool for the CRC. So that means that how students do on the CRC will be very indicative of how they do on the, should be very indicative of how they do on the diagnostic test. Now, I say that, however, I don't speak in absolute. I already know as soon as we get that first score profile that may show exactly the opposite of what I'm saying is going to be emailed to us, properly redacted, just to let us know that it happened. However, the intent, the psychometric processes behind the TSIA2 with the norming of the diagnostic to the CRC, we don't anticipate that to happen. And again, or based on statistical modeling, the expected percentages at or above the CRC scores are aligned with current student performance. So we've worked quite in depth with the test vendor to do modeling based off of the cut scores or the college readiness benchmarks that have been adopted in terms of what does that look like with a simulated pool of testers, like taking our current tests or even taking the TSIA2, and the percentages are coming out fairly the same. So we don't anticipate a huge insurgence into developmental education or a huge insurgence of those students that previously wouldn't have been classified as college ready to be classified as such. The diagnostic profile, breaking that down a little bit more, it's 3 components. So you'll get the overall diagnostic level score of 1 through 6. You'll get a proficiency level and statement for each strand. So for each of those strands, like perhaps like for example, math, for algebraic reasoning, in quantitative reasoning, and the other two, you'll get a proficiency level that says basic, proficient, or advanced for each one of those, in addition to a statement for each of those strands. So note that within each proficiency, there exists an invisible range that you will not see. You'll just see basic, proficient, or advanced. However, you may have a student that two students that have the same combination of proficiency levels, yet their overall diagnostic score is not the same. And when I say not the same, one might be a 5 and one might be a 6. And I highlight that because now in math, if the student scores diagnostic level 6, that student is considered college ready. If the student is diagnostic level 5, that student is required to go into a corequisite model. So even within, although you'll only see basic, proficient, and advanced, there is a range. And we always like to think of it as kind of like low, medium, high within each of those basic, proficient, and advanced that will have an impact on the overall diagnostic level score that you see. And then the last component of the diagnostic profile is the learning locator code. And again, the learning locator code provides the student with customized access to the TSIA2 learning resources library. And there was a question earlier that would the student have access to the learning locator code once they leave the testing center? Yes, it's printed on their individual student, on the individual score report, as well as the student can look up their individual score report in the student portal if perhaps they lose that paper copy. And the learning locator code is a series of numbers and letters, is not a hyperlink. So they'll enter the learning locator code at a designated website and it'll provide them with their customized access to the resources. Owning in on the college readiness benchmarks for the TSIA2 for ELAR, if the CRC is greater than or equal to 945 and the SA is greater than or equal to 5, the student is college ready. And for a student that scores less than 945 on the CRC, has a diagnostic level score greater than or equal to 5, and an essay greater than or equal to 5, that student is also considered college ready. For mathematics, the college readiness classification score is greater than or equal to 950, the student is college ready, or the CRC is less than 950 and the student scores a diagnostic level 6. That student is considered college ready. And yes, I'm monitoring the questions as they come in. Yes, institutions will have access to the students' learning locator codes in the database. They will be able to pull those on the individual score report or through your customized reporting. And again, just note, both TSIA and TSIA2 scores are valid 5 years from date of testing. And here's the flow of what students will experience. For ELAR, I broke it down into 2 slides. So I'm going to start with if the CRC is greater than or equal to 945. So if the student scores a 945 or higher on the CRC for ELAR, the student will be routed directly into the essay. And pending how they do on the essay, they have 1 or 2 outcomes. If the student scores a level scores 5 through 8 on the essay, that student is considered college ready. If the student scores 1 through 4 on the essay, the student is then routed to the ELAR diagnostic test. So that's the routing, how the student would experience the test, how the student will move through the test. Conversely, if a student scores less than 945 on the college readiness classification test, you'll see the student goes directly into the ELAR diagnostic test with a score of 910 through 944, which is the 40 additional 48 multiple choice questions. Pending how the student does on the diagnostic test determines what happens next. If the student scores diagnostic level 1 through 3, so at the lower end, the test ends for the student and the student will receive their diagnostic profile and learning locator code and and will not receive the essay. If the student scores diagnostic level 4 through 6, the student will be administered the right place or essay. Pending how the student does on the essay determines what happens next. If the student scores diagnostic level 5, 6, and an essay score of 5 through 8, the student is college ready, and that's that second chance pass opportunity. If the student scores diagnostic level 4, and in regard to their essay score, the test will end for the student, and the student will receive their diagnostic profile and learning locator code. If you have any questions on this, please feel free. My contact information will be at the end. I tried my best to make sure that it was clear, but definitely if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. For math, it is much simpler. For math, if the student scores 950 to 990, real simple, the student is college ready. If the student scores 910 through 949, the student will be routed to the math diagnostic test. And if the student scores diagnostic level 1 through 5, the student will receive their diagnostic profile and learning locator code. If the student scores diagnostic level 6, the student will be considered college ready. And again, that's the second chance pass opportunity for math. And there are a couple of questions that came in. Does the learning locator code expire? My first inclination is no. However, I will double check that answer with our test vendor. And now I'll yield to Suzanne, and she's going to provide you with some guidance for placement regarding the scores.
Yes, thank you, Keelan. So a big question that we often get, so we understand, the college readiness designation. Now, in terms of requirements for mandatory co-requisite placement, this is going to be the next guidance level, placement guidance level. So if we talk about for ELAR, if the student scores 945 or better, and if the essay is in the range of 1 to 4 with a diagnostic of 5 to 6, the way current rule is written, that student should be placed in a co-requisite. If the essay is 4 and the diagnostic result is a 4, we recommend consideration for placement, since in the scheme and when comparing it to the college readiness benchmark, one would probably categorize this student as near college ready. Now, if on the other hand, if the student places below a 945, and again, if the diagnostic is at level 5, 6, that is again a mandatory co-requisite placement. If the diagnostic is level 4 to 6 and the essay is 3 to 4, then we recommend the institution consider co-requisite placement, because again, in the overall scheme, especially when comparing to the college readiness benchmark, that student probably would be near college ready. And one other comment that I do want to make, the way rules are currently written, we do not have a mandatory co-requisite placement rule that considers the essay score. And right now, the rule is based solely on the diagnostic. If the student has a diagnostic of 5 or 6 and didn't already meet the benchmark, then that student would be placed or should be placed in a co-requisite. Next slide. With regard to math, again, if the student scores below the 950 and the diagnostic is a 5, that is a mandatory co-requisite. And just to remind everyone, the diagnostic of a 6 is the second chance college readiness. If the diagnostic is student scores in the CRC below 950, but the diagnostic test is 4, that would be another consideration for your institution to consider co-requisite placement, perhaps based on the student's pathway. So if a student or the student's meta major or the student's degree plan requires a non-algebra math, this student might be a good candidate for a co-requisite. Also, of course, depending on the strengths based on the individual strands. And so that would be another consideration that we would invite institutions to consider. And again, that would be an institutional decision. The only thing that is mandatory in terms of math would be the diagnostic placement score. I'm sorry, the diagnostic score of 5 is that mandatory co-req. Next slide. That said, we want to let everyone know that starting in early spring, we are going to go through the process of calling for nominations to convene both an ELAR and math work group comprised of faculty content experts. And we want to turn to you to provide additional guidance and make recommendations for fall 2021 and later placements, because as we noted earlier, certain students, 100% of students who score at level 5 and or 5.6 with ELAR would be required to be placed in co-requisites, but especially when it comes to the ELAR, which doesn't consider the essay score at this time, those are the kind of recommendations and feedback we will be seeking from the content experts. And additionally, with the math work groups, we would be seeking additional recommendations and guidance, especially with regard to the various math pathways. Next slide. So just a couple of additional initiatives that we just wanted to highlight as we come near the end of our formal part of the presentation today. We do have our 2020 College Readiness and Success Model grantees. We had 13 awards over $1 million. And the main focus for these awards were that the institutions focused on 100% co-requisite enrollments for certain students, considering all of the HB 2223 exemptions. And those enrollments are starting this spring, and they are also using multiple measures and various non-course based options as support components. So we're very excited about the work that these institutions are doing, and will certainly provide opportunities for the grantees to report and to talk about their experiences. In addition, I'm going to skip to that last bullet. We also have contracted with EduPolicy, who will be doing helping us do an evaluation of the implementation of House Bill 2223, and including both qualitative and qualitative considerations. And our professional development priorities upcoming will be on providing the additional guidance and support to institutions as they enhance and scale co-requisites, especially as we move to 100% co-requisite for certain students starting in fall 2021. And of course, as always, advising, right? That is the key for our student success and for guiding students in the appropriate pathways for them. Next slide. So Keelan, you want to talk about remind everyone about our TSI Gov delivery listserv.
Yes, if you have a colleague, I'm sure many of you already subscribe to our TSI DE listserv, but if you have a colleague, or if perhaps you don't subscribe yourself and you would like the latest and greatest in developmental education in TSI to get those updates firsthand, please, you can either use the QR code there or click the link when you receive the presentation to subscribe to our listserv. Pretty straightforward. And last but not least, here's our contact information. And If you have any questions, I can't stress enough. I've been where you sat. I worked at an institution for 14 and a half years prior to coming to the coordinating board. And in my portfolio, I dealt with TSI, and it never amazed me. It always amazed me every time I called, thinking I would get the third administrative assistant or the next person in line. Dr. Morales Vale always answered her phone and was always very helpful. So now I'm part of that team and lend us as a resource to you. There's no question too big or too small. Um, we're in this for student success, so we want to make sure that if you have any questions about interpreting TSI statute or rule, if you need guidance with placement protocols, we've done it all. We've zoomed into staff meetings. We're here. Please reach out to us. And then Suzanne, if you had any closing thoughts, I'll go ahead with question and answer.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone about the protocols that the coordinating board follows in terms of convening, asking for nominations for those faculty work groups and a number of other advisory committees that we often seek nominations for. We send those requests to your institution's chief academic officer, and also every institution, whether you're a community college or university, as a designated THECB liaison. We also include that liaison, your institution's liaison, in those requests for nominations. So I highly, highly encourage you, if you're interested in this kind of work, if you're an institution that doesn't always make those kinds of announcements very transparent, please feel free, if the culture at your institution allows you to do so, and encourages you to do so, please feel free to reach out to your chief academic officers and your THECB liaison and let them know that you are very interested in this kind of work in providing faculty content expert recommendations and guidelines. We love to get a number of the nominations. We want to make sure that we have representative representation, not only demographically, but also to consider diverse viewpoints. Race, ethnicity, gender, of course, is very important to us as we consider all of these factors with an equity lens. But again, please feel free. I encourage you to reach out so that we can be sure to get your information as part of our nomination process.
All right, now jump in with a couple of questions, Suzanne. And first, I'll answer the first one. Can the TSIA2 be administered with Examity? And the answer is yes. However, just be reminded, only the live version, the AI version of Examity is not permitted for use, only the live version. And Suzanne, the next question I'll volley to you. Can a student opt out of corequisite placement with a Diagnostic 5 score? So essentially, if it's required that a student is placed in a corequisite, can the student opt out?
Generally, the answer is no. Just like they couldn't opt out when you let the student know that they must enroll in a corequisite or they must enroll in a standalone developmental education class. Those are your, whatever your guidance is and whatever your protocols are, but we will count that student in your calculation. And again, we do expect that institutions have a variety of co-requisite options. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not necessarily a robust 3 credit hour intervention for a student who is near college ready or 1 or 2 points below. And even making a small cohort of students who would just regularly meet with you and come in contact with you once a week, and you monitor and work with their faculty members to see if there's continued to do well in that college level course. So anyway, there's a lot of different options available to you, anything from 4 all the way upwards of 96 hours and everything in between. So we really encourage you to offer a wide range so that students don't feel like they're really forced into one model or another.
Awesome. Can students take the TSIA over 2 days, maybe math one day and ELAR the next, without hitting save and continue?
Yes, absolutely. Each of these subject areas are individual separate tests. Um, Once they do start an ELAR or a math test, they can still finish that test over a period of a number of days, up to 13, but they would have to use that save and continue later feature once they start in that particular subject area. And by the way, there are many circumstances where a student may be college ready in math, but not in ELAR, or vice versa, because of dual credit coursework maybe that they had successfully completed, or other college level coursework they transferred in from another institution, or maybe even getting an SAT or ACT score that met the benchmark in one area, but not the other. So that is actually very common, where students will only take the test in one subject area.
All right, the next question. Does the THECB have a recommendation for diagnostic scores to place students in developmental math course that is not paired with the college level course?
So in non-corequisite options,
Yes.
yes, and so that's one of the things that we will be throwing out to the math faculty content expert work group that we're going to be convening. But meanwhile, yes, we probably, depending on the pathway that the student is taking, if it's a non-algebra intensive pathway, and depending on how they did in the various strands, whether basic, proficient, or advanced, certainly there would be recommendations where a student might be better served in a standalone, especially if they're not at least at level 5. Remember, if they're at levels 1 to 4, that is, those students are exempt for any sort of mandatory co-requisite.
Does the CRC score have any meaning below 950? In particular, we have two tiers of co-requisite support. Diagnostic 5 would include both tiers. Can we use the CRC score to designate the higher preparation level tier from the lower preparation level tier?
Keelan, I'll let you tackle that one.
So in theory, I see, again, it was to the point that I made as I was presenting about the scores. With the connection with the norming of the diagnostic test to the CRC, it can be used independently. However, if you want to use that additional piece, how they performed on the college readiness classification score as an indicator, by all means, it's one more tool in your toolbox. It's an additional piece of data. However, again, they're normed against the same ability scale. So it's essentially more questions that you're looking at. But in theory, I don't think it would hurt, but it's not a different test, so to speak. And definitely reach. I know we have a great connection. I know who asked the question. Um, if there's a more nuanced piece to this, definitely reach out to us, and we can definitely set up a time to go through all the considerations to provide the best guidance as well, with actual considerations of the courses that you're considering and maybe some of the more nuanced circumstances.
Yeah, and Keelan, I also want to emphasize for everyone a point you made earlier. We will be monitoring very closely with our College Board colleagues the outcomes from the first day of launch. We really plan to look at it on a weekly basis. I know the sample size will be quite small, obviously, at the beginning, but we will be looking at those outcomes very closely. And if there's anything that is valuable to share, then, and also that we certainly will be sharing with the faculty work groups that will be convening, I think that will also be very useful in helping with guidance and placement decisions.
What is the diagnostic level score of 1 through 6 that would put a student into the lowest level of math, currently those scoring ABE 1 through 3, and would be below level for co-requisite model placement?
So just to reiterate, the diagnostic levels are the same as the current version. So when a student takes the diagnostic and moves into level 1 to 4, I apologize, I just realized my laptop was not plugged in and I just got a low battery signal. So if the student gets a diagnostic level of 1 to 4 on the TSIA 2.0, that is equivalent in terms of knowledge and skill levels as the current level 1 to 4. And that's why that part hasn't changed in terms of not being required to be placed in a co-requisite if the student scores at level 1 to 4. The only thing that we recommend institutions to possibly consider is if a student does assess at level 4, they actually might be a good candidate for a co-requisite, especially in a non-algebra pathway, if those strands also indicate that they do have that level of proficiency that your faculty would be comfortable with. So again, just to reiterate, levels 1 to 4 from the diagnostic are not subject to mandatory co-requisites. They could be placed in a co-requisite as an option, but they're not subject to mandatory co-requisite placement. Just as the current TSIA, the rule does not change that exemption, if you will, from mandatory placement into co-requisite remains the same even for TSIA 2.0.
I'll address a couple of questions real quick, and I think we'll have questions for 2 more of these great questions that are coming in, Suzanne. Will a diagnostic level 4 student count against an institution when it comes to House Bill 2223? The answer is no. Diagnostic level 4, 1 through 4 are omitted from the House Bill 2223 calculation. So just be reminded that particularly when Suzanne talked about the recommendation for co-recking those level 4 students, that pursuant to their, as applicable to their major, in a non-algebra co-requisite course, it neither helps or hurts House Bill 2223, whether that student is enrolled in whether you enroll them in a standalone Dev Ed class or you enroll them in a co-requisite model, they're still going to be outside of the House Bill 2223 calculation with regard to the rules. However, one thing that we always like to share, particularly for our community colleges, if you consider that recommendation, it allows the student to build momentum and persistence towards their credential. And it also allows you as an institution to earn those success points earlier, particularly when the student becomes college ready in math, as well as the completion of that first college level course. And though I don't say that to have you consider it from a financial basis, but the benefit to the student, particularly in building momentum towards that credential, which is one of the main purposes for the aggressive developmental education reform across the years within the state. So students can be more successful and not get caught in a rat race of standalone developmental education, which we know the outcomes are not near as successful as co-requisite models. So that's what we hinge our recommendation to enroll those level 4 students in non-algebra co-requisite models as applicable to their major upon. And then Suzanne, I will give you, we have 2 more, we'll go a couple of minutes over. Do you have recommendations for courses for incoming transfer students separating ELAR? Currently, we use reading, history, and writing. For English, I believe, would English now clear students for both?
Generally speaking, we have always recommended that English be both reading and writing intensive. And so I think most institutions actually do follow that recommendation. And so, you know, that wouldn't change.
And I think I just answered that. Since ELAR is now one test on the TSIA2, will a student who passes a college level gateway course like government or history be TSI complete in both reading and English?
That would depend if your institution if your institution currently, like most institutions have, they have classified the non-English courses, but they're still the core gateway courses like history, government, psychology, sociology. Most institutions have classified those as reading only. So if the co-requisite student is placed in that kind of co-requisite with those courses through, of course, it would be integrated reading and writing, they will be college ready with successful completion in both reading and writing, even if the course is designated as reading only. However, if the student is met in writing only and they're placed in a co-requisite with a reading only designated course, then again, successful completion would make them ready in that remaining area, whichever the area is not designated.
Last two, I've received this question 3 times in the last 2 minutes. Can a student take the essay as a retest on the TSIA2?
So essay only, yes.
Yes.
For retesting purposes only, yes, they can. So in other words, they may have gotten at least the 945. They scored high enough on the diagnostic to receive, they got a 5 on the diagnostic to receive the essay, but they got a 4 or below in the previous test. And so now all they want to do is just take the essay to get a 5 or better, because those other scores would make that student then college ready. That is definitely an option. But we want to reiterate and really emphasize that an essay only is for retesting only. That we don't want to get the student the impression that a student scoring a 5 or better on an essay only without any other component of the TSIA or TSIA2, that would suffice as a college readiness benchmark, because it does not.
And the very last question, and it came up a couple of times as well. What happens if a student placed under the exceptional circumstances provision does not TSI test by the end of the semester?
Well, that's a good question. So the answer is it depends. If the student, I'm sorry, the first part, was the student successful in the college level course?
It doesn't say.
Okay, so if the student was placed based on Rule 4.55, the exceptional circumstance, so they don't have a test score, they were placed in the college level course as a standalone, and the student successfully completed or has every indication of successfully completing, the student does not need to test on the TSIA. On the other hand, if the student, and we would recommend to look around now, consulting with the student's faculty member, if the student is struggling or it looks likely that they will not pass the course, now is the time to schedule them for a TSIA test in the subject area. So there's still some time left. I know it's getting very close to institutions. I understand some may not even be coming back after Thanksgiving for formal courses, but there's still some time before the official end of the semester to go ahead and schedule that student now to go ahead and test, whether it be in person or through virtual.
All right, and Suzanne, I just wanted to formally end our webinar. However, we still have a few questions that are coming in, and I know while we're available, I want to try to address as many questions as possible so we can have them on the record when we publish the webinar. So if by chance you do need to leave us, we have presented all of the formal content. And if it's okay, Suzanne, if we can hang out a little while longer just to address some of the questions that have been posed to make sure we capture answers for those. And again, this webinar is being recorded and it will be published on the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board's YouTube page. If you search TSIA2 and as a attendee, you will receive a notice from me as well with that information. So if you need to leave, definitely we're formally done. We're just addressing the questions that have been posed at this point.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And those who do have some remaining questions, we're here to serve.
Okay, can a student be TSI complete in math from TSIA and then just take ELAR for TSI compliance to be complete for reading, writing? So take the TSI math and then take the TSIA2 later for ELAR. Basically, can we mix and match?
Yes, and in the sense, as long as they have completed that entire suite, the CRC and the diagnostic for the math and all the scores are appropriate, absolutely. Remember that TSIA current score is valid 5 years from date of testing. So they technically have up to 5 years from the date of test to present that score to a college or university for placement purposes. And so if they haven't done the ELAR portion yet, or the reading and the writing portion on the current, then they certainly can do that with the launch of the TSIA 2.0.
And I think we have a few more. Will Appendix Q, the guidelines for first college level course, be updated so that it is ELAR in math instead of reading, writing, and math?
Yes, a wonderful question.
I
In
was thinking the
fact,
same thing.
yeah, we were just talking to our colleagues in the data division, and yes, we actually are planning to convene another group of content experts for this purpose as well, and that is to update that guidance document. There are a couple of things that really do need to be updated, and certainly to reflect the new ELAR benchmarks is one of those. And I also can tell you that Dr. Melissa Humphreys and Dr. Yuji Kim, who we work very closely with regard to TSIA data, they have provided some guidance to your reporting officials with regard to any new reporting changes specifically for TSIA 2.0 and including success points. So remember, in the success points, the reading and the writing separately were worth only a half point each. The math was worth 1 full point. So all that's really going to happen now in terms of success points, now that we've combined the reading and the writing, that will then serve to be 1 point together, equivalent to the 1 point for math.
And
Oh, Keelan, there's another question I keep seeing. Can anyone have access just to the PowerPoint?
you're asking me?
Yes, I know we definitely have, obviously, when we have the recording, that includes the PowerPoint. But if someone were to just want to look at the PowerPoint.
Particularly, my comfort level is usually if it's someone who attended the webinar, I can definitely distribute it because a lot of things are in context. However, with the interpretation of certain things, but reach out to me and I'll make sure you get the necessary information that you need.
Yeah, and a lot of times also the content of what is in this PowerPoint is available in a separate document. And we certainly, in some cases, it just might be easier to share those documents with you, rather than actually looking at the PowerPoint.
And there's a question, but I don't think I fully understand it. It says, on the alternative placement, is it only good for one term?
Okay, so I'm assuming alternative placement means the COVID waivers.
Yes.
Those by order of Commissioner Keller, they were applicable starting in summer 2020. So this past summer, they're applicable this fall. They're applicable spring 2021 for any placements in spring 2021 and for any placements for summer 2021. That is already currently approved, and that is already in place. What is under consideration by leadership is to add another year to that waiver, to those COVID waivers. So then that would be for any placement starting next fall 2021 all the way through summer 2022. That is currently under consideration by our leadership, and certainly once a determination has been made, we will absolutely share that information. The most direct way of sharing that would probably be through our listserv, if not already announced separately by our commissioner and through our communications team.
Awesome. And there was one last one. Interesting. It was regarding the exceptional circumstances placement. How do we force students to test, just not to allow them to avail themselves of the exceptional circumstances provision again, or just not allow them to enroll at all?
Oh, I don't think we would ever recommending not allowing students to enroll. So in other words, the student does not want to test, even though the student has testing available. It's hard for me to kind of picture that, because certainly institutions had to deal with that even pre-COVID. So whatever your institutional policy is, I would highly recommend, again, to avoid not enrolling a student, because that probably would not be good for that student, especially if they've shown up at your door, gotten their babysitter, gotten their transportation, whatever it is, however they got to your front door. When we talk about really helping with student completions and student enrollments and access, maybe try to unpack a little bit what it is that the student might be concerned. They might have some myths or unreasonable concerns, or just some misinformation about the test. It may also be a money issue, especially now. So maybe recommend convening a team at your institution to provide some extra monetary support for those students who are even having trouble with paying for a test. So it could be something as simple as, or I don't want to say simple because that's always a very important issue to consider, but it could be something like not being able to test or pay for the test. So maybe try to unpack a little bit more why the student is refusing to test, and hopefully be able to address the student's concern in that way and let them know. In some cases, it might be the better option, maybe not in all cases.
If a student does not meet the CR benchmark with the CRC test score for mathematics and CRC test score plus essay for reading and writing, a student is required to present a diagnostic score before any additional classification can be made, correct? The additional classification could be CR with the second opportunity, or diagnostic classification previously in CR. I think for that one, we might be conflating two things. The current version of the TSI, if you had the CRC test score plus essay, and I'm assuming, Mr. Hernandez, if you could tell me, is this in the context of TSIA, the current version, or the two? Because I think I'm processing it two ways. Or if you kind of caught that, Suzanne, and you think you have an understanding, you can take a stab at it.
No, I'm sorry, I'm missing I think I'm missing the gist of the question.
Because I think part of it is with the current reading and writing. With the writing, if you have the objective score and the essay score, but it doesn't create a passing combination, you need that diagnostic score in order to make the final assessment in order to accurately, hold on, I think.
It could also be that we hear sometimes, especially students transitioning from school districts, to the community college or to the university, that they don't have a full score. They just have that 310 to 390 number. They don't
Yes.
have that diagnostic score. And so, yes, absolutely, that student. Now, remember that you, as an institution, your reporting folks, your test administration folks would have access to that student's test score, not only the CRC score, but also the diagnostic level score. Of course, the student would have to, give permission to pull your scores, to pull that student's scores, and then they could look up that diagnostic level score, especially for those students maybe who come from a school district that didn't provide that full range of the test information.
All right. The student was COVID waived, but only took a reading intensive course in the fall. Is the student required to take the full TSIA the first semester they enrolled, or does the waiver roll over for both for math into spring?
Oh, okay. So, all right. So let's get a scenario where a student has a TSIA reading, their reading complete, their reading met. And the recommendation now would be to highly get that student in to take the writing, the TSIA writing. Otherwise, if they wait until January 11th or later, they will have to retest on the ELAR test in order to provide information for that missing component. So that's, again, if they just have one area that is met, again, try to get them to test in the area that's still missing on the current version when it comes to the reading and the writing. Now with math, that is separate. So if they have a reading score and they're reading met now, and they didn't take the TSIA math yet, or they have taken the TSIA math but didn't meet, if they wait until January 11th or later, they will just need to retest on, or test originally if they haven't tested yet, on the TSIA2 math.
All right, and this is officially the last question. If a student enrolls in a writing intensive course under COVID-19 waiver but does not earn a C or above, the student is required to take the TSIA in all subject areas or only in the subject area for which the student attempted. In other words, the student is required to test an ELAR and essay, but would the student be able to use the COVID-19 waiver for math and reading, or is the student required to test in all three subject areas?
No, and I mean, it is complicated, but technically an institution can apply the waiver just for one subject area and not another subject area. And by the way, the way the waiver is written, it also, even for a student who does have a TSIA score, an institution may choose to, I'm going to kind of use the word override that score and still use some other measure in lieu of or in addition to. So in lieu of, even if they do have a TSIA score, they can use another factor, another indicator for placement decisions. Again, it's completely up to the institution. Now, the reason why I say, that gets a little bit complicated is because whatever you do choose to use as an institution in terms of your multiple measures, indicators, you've got to be able to accurately report that back to the coordinating board through CBM reporting and through your DEPS reporting, whatever indicators you have used. And most important, whatever indicators you use, including these exceptions and so forth, please put it in writing. The last thing we want to happen is that certain groups are advantaged because something wasn't in writing and the policy is not equitably applied. So please make sure, and by the way, your institution may be open up for some institutional complaints, for some student complaints. If the perception is whatever your multiple measures policy is not equitably applied. So the best way to address that is make sure that all your parties get together, including your advisors, your reporting officials, your faculty. Everyone knows what those measures are and what those benchmarks are, and that those are applied equitably across the board, including any exceptions.
And that's it, Suzanne.
All right. Well, thank you everyone very much. And please, as Keelan mentioned, please feel free to email us at any time. And then of course, also, if you think that it would be valuable for us to meet, in a Zoom meeting or Zoom in, as Keelan mentioned, in any of your meetings, we're more than happy to. Please feel free to know that we are here for a resource for you, for guidance and any other role that we can play to make your student success #1 priority for your institution. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.